opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com.
And you're reading. Muted.
Hey, welcome back to Dave and Mackie's Shiny Side Out. That's us. Listener Funded Radio, meaning you, the listener, have to donate. Well, you don't have to, but it'd be good if you did. If you could donate or tell people about the station, it's all good. Because electricity is not free. It could be. It could be. But it isn't. But it could be. It should be. But it isn't. So please donate if you can. But hey, we are talking about human-animal hybrids. Very controversial kind of thing because it's real. You see, a lot of the things we discuss here on the Shiny Side Out there, well, you know, speculative. Or sometimes, you know, just really interesting conspiracy theories because, you know, but you know, they could not be true. They could be, you know, complete nonsense. But human hybrids are a real thing. It's happening. People, scientists, governments are actually experimenting with that technology. Should they? Or shouldn't they? What are the repercussions here? What are the legal ramifications of having animals with potentially human level intelligence, right? Or humans little better than animals, but human in form nonetheless. And what will these creatures be used for? And where do we draw the line? Will we draw a line? Is there a line that we cannot cross? The answer to that, I kind of think, is there isn't. Once we start down that track, that's it. But I think we were talking last time human-animal hybrids. And what it tells me here that we up to. I think we're up to.
I'll tell you
the
when
description
you
of
send me
it.
the link again. For some reason, it's opened it in an online version, and I can't see.
Oh. Oh, you can't see the text?
No, I can't see the file at all.
Oh. Hang on a second, brother. I'm gonna open up Teams. And I'll send it to you on Teams. Why? But you do have to. Okay, just download the file.
Yeah, I can't. Did you send it to me again?
I'm just about to. As soon as it opens up, I will. But in the meantime, let me get started. Now, for thousands of years, these hybrids have been one of the most common themes in storytelling about animals throughout the world. The lack of a strong divide between humanity and animal nature in multiple traditional and ancient cultures has provided the underlying historical context for the popularity of tales where humans and animals have mingling relationships, such as in which one turns into the other, or in which some mixed beings go, you know, through a journey. I mean, if you love D&D, you come across these things all the time, right? Dungeons and Dragons, etc. I mean, fantasy literature is full of it. No question. In fact, our literature, our mythology, our traditions, our fairy tales are so overladen with these creatures that one would have to ask, well, is there some reality here in the past of it? Not only that, what these stories tell us that we are part of a larger ecosystem. See, these days in the West, we like to see ourselves as apart from the rest of the world, or the rest of nature, if you will, right? And that's of course not the case. We are very much part of it, but we don't like to admit it. And by having animal-human hybrids, it just makes us realize, oh, no, we are very much part of nature. If we can hybridize with animals, forget other human species, forget Neanderthal, forget Cro-Magnon or Homo florensis, Denisovans, forget all of that. If we can create creatures that are part animal, or what we consider animal and part human, then we are very much part of the natural system. And my Teams just doesn't want to start up.
Don't worry,
That's
I
okay.
found it.
Interspecies friendships within the animal kingdom, as well as between humans and their pets, additionally provides an underlying root for the popularity of such beings. In various mythologies throughout history, as I've just mentioned, many particularly famous hybrids have existed, including as part of Egyptian and Indian spirituality. The entities have also been characters in fictional media more recently in history, such as in H.G. Wells' the work The Island of Dr. Moreau, and then subsequent movies that were made out of that. But that's a very specific animal-human hybrid kind of story. In legendary terms, the hybrids have played varying roles from that of trickster and or villain to serving as divine heroes in very different contexts, depending on the given culture. For example, Pan is a deity in Greek mythology that rules over and symbolizes the untamed wild, being worshipped by hunters, fishermen, and shepherds in particular. The mischievous yet cheerful character is a satyr, who has the hindquarters, legs, and horns of a goat, while otherwise being essentially human in appearance, with stories of his encounters with different gods, humans, and others being retold for centuries on after the days of early Greece by groups such as the Delphian Society. Also, he was a very lusty character, as most satyrs were. When I say lusty, I mean very lusty. Specifically, the human-animal hybrid has appeared in acclaimed works of art by figures such as Francis Bacon. Additional famous mythological hybrids include the Egyptian god of death, named Anubis, and the fox-like Japanese being is called Kitsune. Now, it's very interesting to note at this point that in Greek mythology specifically, but not only in Greek mythology, Zeus frequently would take on the form of an animal. A swan, a bull, or whatever might have you, and then have relations with a human woman. And the resulting child would be a hybrid of sorts, like the Minotaur, for example, right? So, again, are we looking here at memories from the distant past? Because it is clear here that the Anunnaki, and I'm sorry that I'm jumping to those guys already, were masters of genetic engineering, at least as far as the texts are concerned, the ancient texts, the epics from Sumerian and Babylonian times, the Enuma Elish, the Gilgamesh epic, etc. In it, we see master genetic manipulators creating a hybrid species, and hybrid species that was us, essentially, that would take on the work of the Igigi and dig the channels that would eventually turn into the rivers of Tigris and Euphrates. But clearly, if they could do that, then any other kind of manipulation of genetic material would not be beyond them. And if we further go on to stipulate here that there have been many civilizations on this planet going back millions of years potentially, then because of who we are and our innate curiosity, I would find it strange if we didn't try to dabble in genetics at some point in our distant past, because we are human beings. We can't help ourselves, right? And I think that the basic nature of human beings hasn't really changed all that much, right? Physically, we might have changed a lot, sure enough, but I don't think we have changed in our nature, what it means to be a human being. When looked at scientifically outside of a fictional and mythical context, the real-life creation of human-animal hybrids has served as a subject of legal, moral, and technological debate in the context of recent advances in genetic engineering. Defined by the magazine H+, as genetic alterations that are blendings of animal and human forms, such as hybrids, may be referred by other names, occasionally such as parahumans. They may additionally be called humanized animals. Technically speaking, they are also called cybrids, cytoplasmic hybrids, with cybrid cells featuring foreign human nuclei instead of them being a topic of interest. Possibly a real-world human-animal hybrid may be an entity formed from either a human egg fertilized by non-human sperm or a non-human egg fertilized by a human sperm. While at first being a concept in the likes of legends and thought experiments, the first stable human-animal chimeras, not hybrids but related, to actually exist, were first created by Shanghai Second Medical University scientists in 2003, as far as we know. says I. The result of having fused human cells with rabbit eggs. Rabbit eggs. So they're like rabbits, rare humans? I don't know, rabbit humans. As well, a US patent has notably been granted for a mouse chimera with a human immune system. In terms of scientific ethics, restrictions of the creation of human-animal hybrids have proved a controversial matter in multiple countries. While the state of Arizona banned the practice altogether in 2010, a proposal on the subject that sparked some interest in the United States Senate from 2011-2012 ended up going nowhere. Although the two concepts are not strictly related, discussions of experimentation into blended human and animal creatures has paralleled the discussions around embryonic stem cell research, the stem cell controversy, if you're interested. The creation of genetically modified organisms for a multitude of purposes has taken place in the modern world for decades. Examples being specifically designed foodstuffs made to have features such as higher crop yields through to better disease resistance. Despite the legal and moral controversy over the possible real-life making of such beings, then President George W. Bush, even speaking on the subject in his 2006 State of the Union address, the concept of humanoid creatures with hybrid characteristics from animals played in a dramatic and sensationalized fashion has continued to be a popular element of fictional media in the digital age. Make no mistake, if we can do it, we will, Dave.
I don't know what you were reading because my note says that we should have been legendary, historical, and mythological human hybrid. Yeah, animal hybrid.
That's exactly where I am now.
And then the next one, no, that's where we should be. I can see what you're saying. It looks like we reread a piece. That's all right. So, legendary, historical, and mythological human-animal hybrids. Beings displaying a mixture of human and animal traits while also having a similarly blended appearance may have played a vast and varied role in multiple traditions around the world. Artist and scholar Pietro Gaetto has written that representations of human-animal hybrids always have their origins in religion. In successive traditions, they may change in meaning, but they still remain within the spiritual culture. Gaetto has argued, when looking back in an evolution-minded point of view, the beings show up in both Greek and Roman mythology with various elements of ancient Egyptian society ebbing and flowing into those cultures in particular. Prominent examples in ancient Egyptian religion featuring some of the earliest such hybrid beings include the canine-like god of death known as Anubis and the lion-like Sphinx. Other instances of these types of characters include figures within both Chinese and Japanese mythology. The observation of interspecies friendships within the animal kingdom, as well as the bonds existing between humans and their pets, have been a source of the appeal in such stories. A prominent hybrid figure that's internationally known is the mythological Greek figure of Pan, a deity that rules over and symbolizes the untamed wild. He helps express the inherent beauty of the natural world as the Greeks saw things. He specifically received reverence by ancient hunters, fishermen, shepherds, and other groups with a close connection to nature. Pan is a satyr who possesses the hindquarters, legs, and horns of a goat while otherwise being essentially human in appearance. Stories of his encounters with different gods, humans and others have been a part of popular culture in several different cultures for many years. The human-animal hybrid has appeared in acclaimed works of art by figures such as Francis Bacon, who, being mentioned in poetic pieces such as in John Fletcher's writings, in Chinese mythology, the figure of Chu Pa Che. I butchered that. How should I pronounce that, Meki?
I think it's fine, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Undergoes a personal journey in which he gives up wickedness for virtue. After causing a disturbance in heaven from his licentious activities, he is exiled to earth. By mistake, he enters the womb of a sow and ends up being born as a half-man, half-pig entity. Is that Pigsy?
It might be, actually.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
With the head and ears of a pig coupled with a human body, his already animal-like sense of selfishness from his past life remains. Killing and eating his mother as well as devouring his brothers, he makes his way to a mountain hideout, spending his days preying on unwary travellers unlucky enough to cross his path. However, the exhortations of this kind goddess Kuan Yin, is that Tripitaka? Journeying in China, persuade him to seek a nobler path. And his life's journey and the side of goodness proceeds on such that he even is ordained a priest by the goddess herself. Remarking on the character's role in the religious novel Journey to the West, where the being first appears, Professor Victor H. Mea has commented that pig-human hybrids represent dissent and the grotesque, a capitulation to the basest appetites rather than self-improvement. Several hybrid entities have long played a major role in Japanese media and in traditional beliefs within the country. For example, a warrior god known as Amida received worship as part of a Japanese mythology for many years. He possessed a generally humanoid appearance while having a canine-like head. However, the god's devotional popularity fell in about the middle of the 19th century. Tanuki resembles a raccoon or badger, but its shape-shifting talents allow it to turn into humans for the purposes of trickery, such as impersonating Buddhist monks. Fox-like creatures known as kitsune also possess similar powers, and stories abound of them tricking human men into marriage by turning into seductive women. There's a long story I'm not going to go into. Other examples include characters in ancient Anatolia and Mesopotamia. The latter region has had the tradition of a malevolent human-animal hybrid deity in Pazuzu, the demon featuring a humanoid shape yet having grotesque features such as sharp talons.
You know, it's interesting. Before we go on here, and then the next bit is interesting, of course. What's interesting here is this. we are now coming across a whole bunch of different kinds of animals, like the chupacabra, for example, or even legends of the skinwalkers out of North America, right? Not to mention the lycanthropes and werewolves of European mythology. But there seems to be a very fundamental thread that is running through various cultures across the world, irrespective of where that is, where either some animals or some humans have the ability to shift into something in between, right? In between this particular animal and the human being. And one is left wondering if it is truly all just flights of fancy. Because again, some of the footage we see these days, some of the videos that make it to the surface, and I'm sure they're fakes, don't get me wrong, but it only takes for one of these videos to be true and right, and for the phenomenon to be true. But it's everywhere. The point is, it's everywhere. the skinwalker myth, the ability for humans to shift into animals, for animals to shift into humans. It's even quite common in Central Europe and German fairy tales. If you look at them, it's a lot of, like a wolf displaying human characteristics. I mean, he's talking to Little Red Riding Hood, for instance, right? And other animals have human characteristics as well. So it is a threat that is everywhere. Now, two things before I go on. Two things. One, is this maybe a memory of when animals and humans could communicate meaningfully? Right? Something that some so-called primitive peoples still seem to be able to do? And secondly, is it the memory of a time when it was more common for shapeshifting to occur as well, right? Never mind the genetic manipulation of hybrids, because the hybrid can't change its shape. Okay? So if you're a satyr or griffin or centaur or whatever the case may be, half animal, half human, that's the shape you have. That's the hybrid that is fixed in its form. In contrast, you have the ones that seem to have the ability to shape shift, as it were. So I think there are two distinct classes of creatures here that we're dealing with, and quite possibly, I know it sounds crazy, but guess what? This is the shiny side out, so I can say whatever I like. Quite possibly with a grounding in reality. Because how do we know? And why not? I mean, the stories are there, and we know how hard it is for fossils to form. And if there was ever a purge of these creatures, I'm pretty sure that we would have burned a whole bunch of them and leaving no evidence whatsoever. Right? So the evidence survives in stories, but sometimes there's physical evidence of the creatures themselves. Right? Maybe Bigfoot is such a creature. I don't know, but it gets really interesting here. Okay, we're going to talk about a guy now, a Russian, Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov. He was a Soviet biologist, and this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, in fact. He was born August 1, 1870 in Russia, and he died March 20, 1932 in Almaty, and he was aged 61. He was a Soviet biologist who developed a method for artificially inseminating domestic animals. So why do you think we have him here? Because there's more to his story. In 1898, Ivanov established in Moscow several zoological laboratories, laboratories, where he studied the structure and vital processes of sex organs of farm animals, including the secretions of accessory sex glands during impregnation. From his observations, he concluded that the single condition necessary for impregnation was the union of spermatozoon and egg, and that spermatozoa retain their motility and potency for a certain length of time if properly preserved. Ivanov succeeded in developing techniques for obtaining, preserving, and disinfecting semen, in addition to devising a procedure for artificial insemination that could be used for all types of livestock. In 1901, Ivanov founded the world's first center for artificially impregnating horses at Dolgo village in Orlovskaya gubernia. He proceeded to experiment with interspecies hybridization, crossbreeding domestic animals with wild varieties by means of artificial insemination. He invented artificial insemination, is the point. His object was to produce commercially usable hybrids and to develop new breeds more resistant to illness and more adaptable to the harsh Russian winters. He produced, for example, a hybrid of domestic horse by crossbreeding a zebra and Przewalski's horse, Equus caballos Przewalski, the only true wild horse still in existence. He also sought to preserve certain endangered species of wild animals, such as the wisent, which is a European bison. Now, thus far, the official story of Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov. Dave?
The Russian government once funded a scientist quest to make an ape-human hybrid. Yes, that's what we're talking about. In 1926, a famed Russian biologist was hell-bent on creating an ape-human hybrid, says Colin Schultz. This January 23, 2013, the story came out. In 1926, less than a decade after the Russian Revolution, Russian Bolshevik Party, which went on to become the Communist part of the Soviet Union, was seeking to stamp out religion, a perceived threat to the party's power. And famed Russian zoologist Ilya Ivanov, an expert in artificial insemination and a man hell-bent on breeding a creature that was half man, half ape, knew how to take advantage of that political push. Stephanie Payne, who wrote in New Scientist a few years ago, Ivanov pitched his pet project, that's a Freudian slip, pet project, to the Russian Academy of Sciences as a way to prove Darwin was right and strike a blow against religion. Supported and financed by the Bolshevik government, Ivanov set off for Africa to catch some chimpanzees and orangutans, and he hoped to use one to artificially inseminate a human woman. Quotes, if he crossed an ape and a human and produced viable offspring, then that would mean Darwin was right about how closely related we are, says Etkind. Originally, Ivanov wanted to force the procedure on an unsuspecting woman. Eventually, he had to seek volunteers. According to Payne, that's also another Freudian slip, Russia's scientists disapproved of Ivanov's quest, but party politics persevered. That's what I was looking for. Ivanov's quest for hybridization was not without precedent. Using his mastery of artificial insemination, he had produced a zedonk, which is a zebra-donkey hybrid, a zubron, European bison cow cross, and various combinations of rats, mice, guinea pigs, and rabbits. In 1910, he told a gathering of zoologists that it might even be possible to create hybrids between humans and their closest relatives. I'm not talking about the Deep South, Mackie. Through
Oh, that's cold.
Cold. Them's farting words. I'm saying it again. I have a little scarf where my sixth finger was taken off. Through the guise of overturning religion was the argument that earned approval from Ivanov's ethically dubious research. Payne suggests that the real reason compelling the work may have been even darker. There is a third possible motive, that Ivanov's research was part of an ambitious plan to transform society. The high-ranking Bolsheviks who backed Ivanov were intellectuals who saw science as a means of realizing their dream of social utopia. Here's a quote, politicians could change the political system, nationalize industries, and turn farms into vast collectives. But the task of transforming people was entrusted to scientists, says Etkind. The aim was to match people to the socialist design of Soviet society. That's a Brave New World, right there. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
One way to do that was through positive eugenics. Using AI to speed up the spread of the desirable traits, a willingness to live and work communally, for instance, and to get rid of primitive traits such as competitiveness, greed, and the desire to own property. Quote, there were many projects aimed at changing humanity, Etkind says, and continues, Ivanov's was the most extreme But if he succeeded, then that would show that humans could be changed in radical and creative ways, unquote. Unfortunately for Ivanov, none of his experiments ever worked, and in the mid-1930s he was exiled to Kazakhstan with the quest for a human-ape hybrid left unfinished. Meki.
Or so we think. Or so we think.
Well,
a blast from the past.
I'm sure we're going to get to Chimpanzee at some point.
No, I'm sure we will, my friend. A blast from the past, the Soviet ape man scandal. This was written by Stephanie Payne. She was quoted in the early article we just read for the magazine Life, August 20, 2018. So the article that we just read was actually quoting her work in this article here. In February 1926, Russian biologist Ilya Ivanov set out for Guinea in French West Africa, where he planned to perform one of the world's most sensational experiments. Ivanov was an expert in artificial insemination and had used his groundbreaking methods to create an assortment of hybrid animals, as we've just heard. Now he was going to try something even more radical, crossing an ape and a human. His trip to Africa was expensive and its purpose highly questionable. Yet the Bolshevik government not only sanctioned it, but also financed it at a time when few Russians were allowed to leave the country. Why would so eminent a scientist risk his reputation, and why did the Bolsheviks back him? It was the story with everything. Secret papers, an evil Soviet dictator, and a zealous zoologist, you gotta love the alliteration here, a zealous zoologist, hell-bent on breeding a creature that was half man, half ape. When details of Ilya Ivanov's attempts to create an ape-human hybrid emerged in the 1990s from the newly opened Russian archives, they prompted a rash of lurid headlines. Ivanov became the Red Frankenstein. His proposed liaisons were invariably dangerous. There was even the suggestion he had been ordered to breed super-strong hairy warriors for what the Sun in London dubbed Stalin's mutant ape army. Yet Ivanov's efforts during the 1920s to create an ape-human hybrid had been anything but secret, according to Alexander Etkind, a Soviet-born specialist in Russian history now at the University of Cambridge. Ivanov's project was a sensation at the time and generated almost as many headlines as it would later on. But when no ape man materialized, the fuzz died down and his research was forgotten. Some 60 years later, scholars reconstructed events from scattered letters, notebooks, and diaries held in assorted government archives. Despite years of digging, however, one vital part of the story remains elusive. None of these documents reveals why he did it, says Etkind. After examining the available evidence, he thinks he has an answer. At the start of the 20th century, Ivanov was internationally acclaimed for his pioneering work in artificial insemination. And having perfected his methods, he was keen to see how they could be applied. His first big project was aimed at improving Imperial Russia's bloodstock, using sperm from the best stallions. Before long, he was pondering the possibilities of hybridization. With artificial insemination, he reckoned he might be able to create novel types of domestic animals, and we've heard all about those. In 1910, he told a gathering of zoologists that it might even be possible to create hybrids between humans and their closest relatives. At that stage, Ivanov was simply speculating, but a decade and a revolution later, he was making plans to put theory into practice. In 1924, he put his proposals to the government. Despite the disapproval of the scientific establishment, Ivanov got the go-ahead and the funds to mount an expedition to Africa to collect apes. Documents show that the decision was pushed through by leading members of the Bolshevik government. In February of 1926, Ivanov set off for Africa. His first stop was Paris, where he won the enthusiastic support of the directors of the Pasteur Institute and the promise of access to the chimps at its new primate center in Guinea, then part of French West Africa. He reached Guinea in late March, only to discover none of the chimps were mature enough to breed. He would have to return later in the year to capture some chimps of his own. Ivanov passed the summer in Paris. Well, why wouldn't you? Where he spent some of his time at the Pasteur Institute working on ways to capture and subdue chimps, and some with the celebrated surgeon Sergei Voronov, inventor of an increasingly fashionable rejuvenation therapy. In a now notorious operation, Voronov grafted slices of ape testes into those of rich and aging men, hoping to regain their former vigor. That summer, he and Ivanov made headlines by transplanting a woman's ovary into a chimp called Nora, and then inseminating her with human sperm. While the press waited for the outcome, reporters turned their attention to Ivanov's usual project. The idea of an ape-human hybrid was both shocking and fascinating. Was it possible? Were humans really closely or that closely related to apes? What would the result be like? And what were the Soviets up to? No. In November, Ivanov returned to Guinea, captured his chimps, and with considerable difficulty eventually inseminated 3 of them. By now he had a second experiment in mind, to inseminate women with chimp sperm. Knowing that no local woman would agree, he planned to do this under the pretext of a medical examination, but the French governor forbade it. None of the 3 chimps conceived. Disappointed, Ivanov headed home with 20 chimps to stock a new ape nursery in the subtropical Soviet Republic of Abkhazia. He knew now that his best chance of creating his hybrid was to find Soviet women willing to carry half-ape babies in the interest of science. In the event, only 4 chimps made it to Abkhazia, and so while the nursery set about acquiring more apes, Ivanov looked for volunteers. At least 5 women volunteered. But although the nursery did get hold of an assortment of apes, they never flourished, and by the time Ivanov was ready to proceed, the only adult male left was Tarzan, a 26-year-old orangutan. Ivanov pressed on until fate dealt his project a fatal blow. Tarzan had a brain hemorrhage. The orang has died. We are looking for a replacement, Ivanov cabled the woman he had lined up to receive Tarzan's sperm. More chimps arrived in 1930, but Ivanov fell victim to the widespread purge of scientists and was exiled to Kazakhstan. He was released the next year, but died soon after. Dave?
5 women offered to carry half-ape babies in the interests of science. So why did Ivanov want so badly to produce a baby that was half-ape, half-human? And why did the Bolsheviks encourage him? When Ivanov put his proposal to the Academy of Sciences, he painted it as the experiment that would prove men had evolved from apes. If he crossed an ape and a human and produced viable offspring, then that would mean Darwin was right about how closely related we are, says Etkind. When Ivanov approached the government, he stressed how proving Darwin right would be a strike to blow. This is very similar to the prior. We're struggling to stamp it out. Success would not only bolster the reputation of Soviet science, but provide useful anti-religious propaganda to boot. That might seem motive enough, yet Etkind points out some have suggested that the aging Bolshevik leaders had something less intellectual in mind. This is conjecture that Ivanov was sent to Africa to bring back apes in order to provide them with glands for rejuvenation. The Kremlin's doctors certainly dabbled in rejuvenation treatments, and Ivanov did have links to Voronov, but Etkind is not convinced. Quote, if you want to cover up a bizarre scheme to rejuvenate aging politicians, then you wouldn't choose an even more bizarre project that's going to attract a lot of publicity. Unquote.
Oh, would you?
Would you? Today, I'd say, hey, everything's possible. Because, it happens. There is a third possible motive that Ivanov's research was part of an ambitious plan to transform society. The high-ranking Bolsheviks who backed Ivanov were intellectuals who saw science as a means of realizing their dream of social utopia. I'm having déjà vu. Politicians could change the political system, nationalise industries, and turn farms into vast collectives. It's exactly the same text. But the task of transforming people was entrusted to scientists, says Ekind. The aim was to match people to the socialist design of Soviet society. There we go. I'm going to say it again. Now, one way to do that was through positive eugenics, using AI to speed up the spread of desirable traits, a willingness to live and work communally, for instance, and to get rid of primitive traits such as competitiveness, greed, and the desire to own property. There were many projects aimed at changing humanity at consent. Ivanov was the most extreme, but if he succeeded, then this would show that humans could be changed in radical and creative ways. Etkin believes this is the most likely reason why the Bolsheviks backed the project, and that it was also what motivated Ivanov. At least in part. Like many others, Ivanov was swept along by the Bolsheviks' dream, he said. Quote, he had proved that AI had the capacity to change nature, and testing its limits was perfectly in tune with the revolutionary times. Unquote. At the end of the day, Ivanov was a typical Russian intellectual. His ends and means today sound truly radical, but if you think about it, a successful hybridization with apes is no more fantastic than a happy life in a communal apartment.
Now, this article was written 5 years before the article that we just read earlier. And as you can see, obviously the original article is a lot more detailed, right? And the reason both articles are here is because we needed to show how much information got lost. So this article was rewritten for, this was Smithsonian Magazine, right? The first article, which is much shorter and much more abridged. This original article was written for New Scientist magazine. So the Smithsonian Magazine took the New Scientist article, cut it down significantly, and I think a lot of the essence of the original article was lost, right? And it's best to compare them side by side. And so 5 years have passed, and I reckon probably 35 to 40% of the informational content of the original article was just not passed on in the second article.
Yes.
Yeah. And on we go until we come to a point where a lot of the information value simply disappears. That was the point of, I think, both articles, the original as well as the...
It makes complete sense. One of the things I noticed between the two articles was this one seemed to be more around the, let's call it the humanity of the life of the chimpanzees and orangutans. Did you notice that? How they didn't survive. They weren't kept well. They didn't like their new environment. Like, I don't know, why don't they eat bananas, right? Or they should be eating, the high sugar, high fat content diets that we eat. I don't know. They just all died. That perspective that I saw, I took from the second article, rather than the first one. I think that made a lot more sense around the way that was being projected to the new audience, or the original audience, isn't it? So yeah,
absolutely. The next is actually a scientific paper, of which we only have an extract here. The whole thing is too long, but it's here because it shines a darker light onto the whole story. And as we share it with you, you will see what I mean. Now, this is Beyond Species, Ilya Ivanov's and his experiments on crossbreeding humans and anthropoid apes. This was published in July 2002, Science in Context. So prior to both articles we just shared with you, and the author here was Kirill Rozyanov of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Now, this is translated from the Russian, so the English is a little... cobblestoney. Argument: I believe that some pollutions are used as analogies for expressing a general view of social order. Mary Douglas, Purity and Danger, published in 1966. The possibility of crossing humans with other anthropoid species has been discussed in fiction as well as scientific literature during the 20th century. Professor Ilya Ivanov's attempt to achieve this was crucial for the beginning of organized primate research in the Soviet Union and remains one of the most interesting and controversial experiments that was ever done on non-human primates. The possibility of removing the boundary that separates humans from other animal species, apes in particular, is loaded with important political meaning and violates cultural and ethical taboos. The history of Ivanov's scientific experiment thus helps to reveal some of the 20th century most important cultural conventions and hidden assumptions about human nature, species, and social hierarchy. And this is really why we wanted this here, for you to understand the mindset of the time. Dave?
The emerging Soviet Union in this same time period evidenced a very different reception to Darwin's ideas. In the mid-1920s, Dr. Ilya Ivanov, thank you. There you go. I'll fix that in post. Dr. Ilya Ivanov, a respected Russian biologist specializing in reproductive physiology, received approval from the Soviet Academy of Sciences to design experiments to produce a new interbred cross species between human and chimpanzees. Etkind, 2008. These experiments were reputed to have had ideological support from North American atheists as well as the Pasteur Institute in Paris, but their primary benefactors were Soviet scientists and anti-religion activists. Researchers have offered different perspectives on what may be suggested by this experimental history. But it is clear that Ivanov's work contributed to a branch of Soviet science that was invested in improving the evolutionary continuity between great apes and humans. Certainly, Ivanov could not have pursued these kinds of experiments had he not received initial support from the mainstream of Soviet science. Meki.
These same racist ideas made African populations easy targets of exploitation as experimental subjects, and this is all abridged, by the way. And in Ivanov's case, even enabled the apparent state of approval experiments involving the artificial insemination of unknown African women. Yet, as Russian historian of science Kirill Rosanov reminds us, excuse me, racist ideologies have been integral to the theories of groups orienting to discontinuity as well as continuity. The US-based Ku Klux Klan is a case in point. Although its early 20th century instantiation rejected evolutionary theories anti-Christian, it nevertheless embraced hierarchical models of race that prioritized white purity and condemned hybridity. And again, abridged, nevertheless, it seems that the Soviet government and the Academy of Sciences sent an expedition to Africa in February of 1926 with the main goal of artificially inseminating chimpanzee females with human sperm so as to obtain a viable hybrid of the two species. The effort was directed by Dr. Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov, who inseminated 3 chimpanzee females with human sperm during the first half of 1927, but failed to obtain a hybrid. And abridged. Ivanov subsequently attempted to arrange further experiments on the artificial insemination of women volunteers with the sperm of a orangutan. His efforts stopped when he was arrested by the Soviet secret police in December of 1930 and was then subsequently exiled to Kazakhstan. And we have a little bit of time, but just to give you an idea here of what's happening next week, scientists title, Dave, because I know you love it.
Scientists playing God managed to create a human chimpanzee hybrid. I do love
That's
that
right.
title.
That's
yeah.
right?
John,
So,
yeah,
and
that's
this
next week.
The Human Z. The Human Z. Yeah, look, it's too long, but we'll go into this next week. There'll be some more, and there's actually we have a picture as well. So I don't want to give the show away, but let's just say it was not as unsuccessful as Ivanov's experiments, we think. Now, what does it all mean, though, right? And you can never divorce the human element here. The Soviets wanted to prove Darwin right. And in doing so, essentially eliminating God or the need for any deity that was involved in the creation of humankind. Because if we had, evolved from apes, then, where does God come into the equation? At least that was the thinking. Not only that, but the idea of hybridization and racial purity was at its peak in the late 19th century and still at the beginning of the 20th century, which of course led to things like National Socialism in Germany and fascism in Italy, and the extermination and persecution and extermination of Jews, Gypsies, and others. And if you're not familiar with it, there was a significant African genocide perpetrated by the Belgians, but the Germans, French, and British weren't far behind. It was in fact the British that invented the concept of a concentration camp. So the basic idea behind all of this as a philosophy, if there's one takeaway here, is to make humans less by making them more animal. So if you're religious, chances are that you believe that God created Adam and Eve, or some version of the story where a God created human beings, right? That's probably part of your fundamental or your foundational belief system. Which means that humans, for better or for worse, are somehow special or better or more than animals. And what a lot of people tried to take away was that distinction. The Soviets or the Bolsheviks or the communists tried to take it away for the whole human race. No, we're all animals. Hence the famous Animal Farm novel. Anyway, but they tried to take it away from all of humanity, making all humans just smart animals. Other groups, like white supremacists, tried to take it away from people that weren't like them, darker in color, etc., etc., where the idea was it was the white race that was superior and special, and the others were in fact not, right? So there was this racial eugenics thinking of supremacy and the attempt to make some human beings less than human beings, right? Anyone of color, Jewish people, etc., right? They were lesser human beings. So the Soviets or the communists tried to make everybody less than God created, and certain racist ideologies tried to make certain specific races less than human. And it's funny how all of this plays just into the same kind of pot. If animal-human hybridization had succeeded, right, under Ivanov, and later on we'll learn it actually has, then the argument could be made for the communists, right? But it does open a whole can of worms around other races and human beings and how human beings see each other. Are you truly seeing every human being as a human being, or do you feel that other human beings are lesser than you are, a lesser human being, a less worthy human being, right? These are dangerous thoughts, and they lead to ethnic cleansing and genocide and wars, and that's I fear, Dave, that's again where we are today.
Yeah, the difference when we start to feel nationalism and cutting your nation off from others. The difference in education, background, religion, culture, they all exhibit extreme differences in how we behave. And these differences, because they're an extreme difference, It's not like, oh, you know, I used my fork in the other hand. It's not as simple as that. And because it's exhibited and it's in front of us, this is where people are incapable of accepting another way of doing something. I watch dash cams all the time, and there's people who just can't even follow the road rules, let alone, you know, are going to be culturally accepting of another group of people. It's just beyond me, Mickey.
Yeah.
But there's the end of the show music going to start. It's starting now.
Crazy.
So I'm going to ask everyone, if you encounter one of our videos, to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Please do that. Helps with the algorithm. We want to get 1 million views, so let's do that. And Meki, the thing that we all live to do, and what is that?
To be
Safe. Safe.
jazz hands, jazz hands, jazz hands, jazz hands.
We'll see you next week for Plato's Cave, 7 a.m. both Tuesday and Thursday. And again for Shiny Side Out. Take care, everyone.
Listening to Revolution